Our story does not begin with a gunshot, but with a handshake. It's February 1945. The war in Europe is not yet won, but the end is in sight. At the Yalta Conference, in a former Tsar's palace on the Black Sea, the Big Three meet: a frail, dying president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, a wary Winston Churchill, and a triumphant, implacable Joseph Stalin. They have been allies in the most terrible war in history, but they are not friends. They are a temporary, necessary alliance between the two greatest capitalist powers and the world's only communist state. And with their common enemy, Adolf Hitler, cornered in his bunker, the cracks in their alliance are starting to show. They meet to draw the map of the new world, but they have fundamentally different visions. Roosevelt sees a new world of democracy, free trade, and a united nations to prevent all future wars. Churchill, the old imperialist, sees a new world where a weakened Britain must hold on to its power, and he is deeply, profoundly suspicious of the man sitting across from him. And Stalin sees a world that has tried to destroy him twice in 30 years. He sees the 27 million Soviet dead. He is not interested in ideals. He is interested in security and control. He wants a buffer zone, a vast shield of captive nations between his borders and Germany. He agrees, on paper, to free and unfettered elections in the lands his Red Army has liberated: Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. But as his troops occupy those capitals, his definition of free becomes brutally clear. Just 5 months later, they meet again at Potsdam, outside a shattered Berlin. Everything has changed. Hitler is dead, Germany is in ruins, and Roosevelt is gone, replaced by a new, untested American president, Harry S. Truman. During the conference, Truman gets a secret message. The atomic bomb test in New Mexico has been a success. He casually mentions to Stalin that America has a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin, who already knows all about it from his spies, just nods. The atomic age has begun, and the world's most powerful alliance is already a quiet, nuclear rivalry. The war ends. The world celebrates. But in Eastern Europe, a new, terrible silence is falling. One by one, Stalin breaks his Yalta promises. In Poland, in Hungary, in Romania, communist parties, backed by the Red Army, seized control. Opponents are arrested, newspapers are shut down, and borders are sealed. It's a method known as salami tactics. You slice away democracy piece by piece until nothing is left. In 1946, Winston Churchill, now voted out of office, traveled to a small college in Fulton, Missouri, with President Truman. He gives a speech that will define the next half-century. He says that from the Baltic to the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. It is a declaration. The alliance is dead. The Cold War has begun. In 1947, the old world was officially broken. Great Britain, shattered by the war, informs the United States that it can no longer afford to prop up the governments of Greece and Turkey, which are both on the brink of falling to communist insurgencies. Truman realizes that if they fall, all of the Middle East could be next. He goes before Congress and delivers a speech that will become his doctrine. He declares that the United States must support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. It is a promise of containment. America is no longer an isolated power. It is the world's policeman. But containment isn't just about guns. Much of Europe is still in ruins, its people starving, its cities rubble. In this environment of desperation, communism looks appealing. So, Truman's Secretary of State, George Marshall, proposes a plan of breathtaking audacity, the Marshall Plan. It is a multi-billion-dollar aid package to rebuild all of Europe, to fight communism, not with tanks, but with food, with steel, with hope. It is, perhaps, the most successful foreign policy in history. It rebuilds Western Europe into a fortress of capitalism. Stalin, seeing it as a threat, forbids any of his new satellite nations from accepting a single dollar. The curtain is now locked in place, but the flashpoint, the single spot on Earth where the two new superpowers will stand nose to nose, is not a country, it is a city, Berlin. Deep inside the Soviet-occupied sector of Germany, Berlin, like the country, is divided into 4 sectors: American, British, French, and Soviet. For Stalin, this island of capitalism in his communist sea is an intolerable embarrassment. In June 1948, he decided to squeeze the Allies out. He shuts down all roads, all railways, and all canals into West Berlin. 2 million people are cut off. It is the Berlin blockade. Stalin is offering the West a horrible choice: abandon the city and look weak, or try to break the blockade with tanks and start World War III. But Truman finds a third option. He will not start a war, but he will not retreat. He will supply the entire city from the air. The Berlin airlift begins. It is an impossible, magnificent feat of logistics. In a non-stop, 24-hour stream, American and British cargo planes fly over the blockade, landing at Tempelhof Airport every 90 seconds. They don't just bring coal and flour, they bring everything. They bring chocolate, dropped on tiny parachutes by pilots for the city's children. The candy bomber becomes a symbol of the entire operation. The people of West Berlin, who just 3 years earlier were America's bitter enemies, now stand on the rubble of their city, cheering for their saviors. After nearly a year, Stalin is humiliated. The blockade has failed. He quietly reopens the roads. The West has won the first great battle of the Cold War without firing a shot. The confrontation hardens the new reality. Germany is formally split in 2. A democratic West Germany and a communist East Germany. The year 1949 is a hammer blow to the West. The game changes completely. First, American spy planes detect radiation in the atmosphere. The unthinkable has happened. Joe 1, the Soviet Union, has successfully detonated its own atomic bomb. America's monopoly is over. The world now has 2 nuclear powers. Then, just weeks later, a world away, the brutal Chinese Civil War comes to an end. The American-backed nationalists are defeated. Mao Zedong, the communist leader, stands in Tiananmen Square and declares the new People's Republic of China. The most populous nation on Earth has fallen to communism. The fear in America is palpable. It feels like the world is being painted red. In response, the West forms its first ever permanent military alliance, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Its message, in the words of its first Secretary General, is to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. The lines are drawn. The Iron Curtain is now made of concrete and steel. The world is divided in 2, armed with weapons that can destroy the planet. And in a small divided peninsula in Asia, an obscure border at the 38th parallel is about to become the site of the first hot war in this new, terrifying Cold War. On June 25, 1950, the Cold War turned hot. In a sudden massive invasion, the communist North Korean army, armed by Stalin and with Mao's blessing, storms across the 38th parallel to liberate South Korea. The South Korean army collapses. President Truman, seeing this as a direct test of his new containment policy, acts immediately. He bypasses Congress, goes to the United Nations, which the Soviets are foolishly boycotting, and gets authorization for a police action. The first American troops rushed to the front, were unprepared and overwhelmed, pushed all the way back to a tiny, desperate perimeter around the port of Pusan. It seems like the communists are about to win. But then, the American commander, General Douglas MacArthur, a man of immense ego and equal brilliance, proposes a masterstroke, an amphibious landing hundreds of miles behind enemy lines at Incheon. It's a wildly dangerous gamble. The tides are treacherous, the defenses unknown. In September 1950, the landing worked. It is a stunning total success. The North Korean army is cut in two, and it disintegrates. The UN forces, led by MacArthur, race north, recapturing Seoul and crossing the 38th parallel. The police action to save South Korea has become a war to roll back communism. They push all the way to the Yalu River, the border of the new People's Republic of China. But the Chinese have issued a stark warning: do not cross. MacArthur, arrogant and dismissive, ignores it. In November 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese volunteer soldiers poured across the border, hidden in the mountains. They smash into the UN forces. It is a new, brutal war. The Marines at the Chosin Reservoir are surrounded in the frozen wilderness, fighting one of the most heroic, desperate retreats in military history. The war settles into a bloody stalemate, a horrific WWI-style trench warfare, right back where it all started, around the 38th parallel. MacArthur, furious, publicly demands that Truman expand the war, blockade China, and use atomic bombs. Truman, who fears this will trigger World War III with both China and the Soviet Union, says no. When MacArthur publicly criticizes the president, Truman does the unthinkable. He fires the greatest living American general. Old soldiers never die, MacArthur tells a weeping Congress. They just fade away. The war grinds on for 2 more years, a forgotten war whose peace talks are as brutal as the fighting. In 1953, an armistice was finally signed. Not a peace treaty, but a ceasefire. Nothing has been won. Nothing has changed. 50,000 Americans are dead. Millions of Koreans and Chinese are dead. And Korea remains, to this day, a nation divided by a razor-wire fence. The bloody stalemate in Korea poisons the atmosphere in America. The fear of communism becomes a paranoid witch hunt. A junior senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, realizes he can build a career on this fear. He stands up and claims to have a list of known communists working inside the State Department. It's a lie, but it's a powerful one. For 4 years, McCarthyism has been a reign of terror. McCarthy's televised hearings are a spectacle of accusation and insinuation. He destroys careers, creates blacklists, and feeds a national hysteria. To be accused is to be guilty. It is a red scare that grips the nation, until McCarthy finally overreaches, accuses the US Army of being soft on communism, and is publicly censured. The paranoia is fueled by an even greater terror: the hydrogen bomb, the super. If the A-bomb was a city killer, the H-bomb is a civilization killer. The US tested Mike in 1952. The Soviets tested their own less than a year later. The arms race is now an existential sprint. This is the new logic of the war: mutual assured destruction. MAD. The only way to prevent nuclear war is to build so many weapons that if one side attacks, the other will be able to retaliate and destroy them completely. It is a suicide pact, holding the entire planet hostage. In 1953, the man who started it all died. Joseph Stalin suffers a stroke, and his inner circle, terrified of him even in death, lets him die. His death creates a massive power vacuum. After a bloody internal struggle, a new unlikely leader emerges, the short, crude, shoe-banging Nikita Khrushchev. In 1956, Khrushchev did something unimaginable. In a secret speech to the 20th Party Congress, he denounces Stalin. He details the dictator's cult of personality, his paranoia, his brutality, his crimes. The speech is a political earthquake. It signals a thaw. Khrushchev releases prisoners from the gulags. He talks of peaceful coexistence with the West. But the thaw has its limits. When West Germany was allowed to rearm and join NATO in 1955, Khrushchev's response was iron-fisted. He creates a rival military alliance, the Warsaw Pact. It is an alliance of the Soviet Union and its new brother nations of Eastern Europe. The two armed camps are now formalized, standing guard, ready for a war that could end the world. Khrushchev's thaw is a dangerous promise. In the satellite states of Eastern Europe, people hear the secret speech and believe it is a signal for real freedom. In 1956, in Hungary, it exploded. Students and workers rise up in a spontaneous, massive rebellion. They tear down statues of Stalin. They fight Soviet tanks with homemade weapons, and they declare their neutrality, their exit from the Warsaw Pact. Their leader, Imre Nagy, begs the United Nations and the West for help. No help comes. The West, distracted by the Suez Crisis in Egypt, does nothing. President Eisenhower is not willing to risk World War III for Budapest. After a few days of hesitation, Khrushchev makes his decision. The Soviet tanks roll in. The Hungarian uprising is crushed with unimaginable brutality. 20,000 are killed. Nagy is arrested and later executed. The message is clear. The thaw is a lie. The Iron Curtain is not a metaphor. It is a wall of steel, enforced by blood. The following year, 1957, the battlefield moved to a place no one expected, the sky. In October, the Soviet Union launched a small, polished sphere into orbit. It's called Sputnik. As it circles the globe, its simple, terrifying beep, beep, beep is broadcast on radios everywhere. It is a profound, psychological shock to the West. The Soviets, a nation America had dismissed as backwards, are now ahead. They have beaten America into space. The panic in the United States is total. It's not just about a satellite. If they can launch a satellite, they can launch a nuclear missile at any city in America. The space race is born. American schools are declared a national security risk and are flooded with new money for math and science. In 1958, America scrambles to catch up, launching its own satellite and officially creating NASA. The goal is no longer just to orbit, but to conquer the moon. The spy war also heats up. The CIA, led by Allen Dulles, and the KGB, the Soviets' new intelligence arm, are in a global back-alley fight. The CIA perfects the art of the covert operation, engineering a coup in Iran in 1953 and another in Guatemala in 1954, replacing leaders they don't like with dictators they do. The primary tool for American espionage is the U-2, a remarkable spy plane that can fly at 70,000 feet, higher than any Soviet missile can reach, or so they think. In May 1960, just days before a major peace summit in Paris between Eisenhower and Khrushchev, a U-2 plane, piloted by Francis Gary Powers, was shot down over the Soviet Union. The US lies, claiming it was a weather plane. Khrushchev then springs his trap, revealing he has the pilot, alive, and the wreckage. The Paris summit collapses in anger. The brief hope for coexistence is over, and the pressure returns to the ultimate flashpoint, Berlin. By 1961, the island of capitalism was a bleeding wound for the communists. West Berlin is a glittering, prosperous success story. while East Berlin is a grey, repressive failure. And there's a loophole. The border between them is open. Thousands of East Germans, especially doctors, engineers, and teachers, are simply walking across, voting with their feet. Khrushchev, furious, gives the new young American president, John F. Kennedy, an ultimatum: get out of Berlin. Kennedy refuses. On the night of August 13, 1961, the world woke up to a horrifying new reality. The East Germans, under Soviet guard, have begun to unroll barbed wire. In a matter of days, the wire is replaced by a concrete wall, the Berlin Wall. It is not a wall to keep enemies out. It is a wall to keep its own people in. It is the ultimate symbol of communist failure. Kennedy, in a show of defiance, travels to the city and declares, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I am a Berliner. But the real test is coming. 90 miles off the coast of Florida, another crisis is brewing. In 1959, a charismatic, cigar-smoking revolutionary named Fidel Castro had overthrown the corrupt, American-backed dictator of Cuba. At first, America isn't sure what to make of him. But when Castro seizes American businesses and declares himself a Marxist-Leninist, the U.S. is furious. In 1961, the CIA convinced Kennedy to approve a secret plan, hatched under Eisenhower, an invasion. They arm and train a small army of Cuban exiles to land at the Bay of Pigs and trigger an uprising. It is a total, unmitigated, humiliating disaster. The exiles are trapped on the beach. Castro's army captures or kills them all. Kennedy looks weak, foolish, and incompetent. Khrushchev, watching this, sees an opportunity. He decides to make the ultimate gamble. He will secretly ship nuclear missiles to Cuba, placing them right on America's doorstep. In October 1962, a U-2 spy plane photographed the missile sites under construction. The world is about to come to the brink. For 13 days, the planet holds its breath. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy's advisors are screaming for an invasion, an airstrike. But Kennedy, haunted by the Bay of Pigs, is cautious. He chooses another path, a naval quarantine of the island. The two most powerful forces on Earth are now eyeball to eyeball. Soviet ships carrying more missiles are steaming toward the American blockade. The world watches. A single shot could trigger Armageddon. In a back-channel negotiation, Kennedy and Khrushchev find a way out. The deal: the Soviets will remove their missiles from Cuba. In exchange, the US publicly promises never to invade Cuba and secretly promises to remove its own missiles from Turkey. Khrushchev, in the end, blinks. The world exhales, but it is the closest humanity has ever come to self-destruction. In the aftermath, a new, terrified sobriety sets in. A hotline is installed, a direct teletype link between the White House and the Kremlin, to prevent a future war by accident. The first nuclear test ban treaties are signed, but the shadow remains. The world has looked into the abyss and now knows the face of its own extinction. The Cuban Missile Crisis proved that a direct war between the two superpowers was unthinkable. The price was annihilation. And so, the Cold War enters a new, more cynical phase. The Great Game moves away from the center, Berlin, and to the periphery. It will now be fought through proxies in the jungles, mountains, and deserts of the Third World. From now on, every civil war, every revolution, every anti-colonial struggle will be drawn into the binary, black-and-white logic of the Cold War. And the ultimate proxy war, the one that will define an era and tear a nation apart, is Vietnam. It begins as a French colonial mess. After World War II, a charismatic Vietnamese nationalist, Ho Chi Minh, who is also a communist, declares independence. The French try to retake their colony. After a humiliating defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the French gave up. The Geneva Accords split the country in two, a communist North and an anti-communist American-backed South. America, obsessed with the domino theory, the idea that if Vietnam falls, all of Southeast Asia will follow, steps in. President Kennedy sends military advisors, but under his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, the advising mission explodes. In 1964, a shadowy, disputed incident in the Gulf of Tonkin gave LBJ the blank check he needed from Congress. He begins a massive bombing campaign, Operation Rolling Thunder, and sends the first U.S. combat troops. It is a war unlike any other. There are no front lines. The enemy, the Viet Cong, is everywhere and nowhere, blending in with the civilian population. It's a war of search and destroy, of body counts, of helicopters slicing over rice paddies, of napalm and Agent Orange. And for the first time, it is a living room war. The horror is beamed, in full color, onto the nightly news. As the draft pulls in hundreds of thousands of young American men, an anti-war movement is born. It grows from college campuses to the mainstream. The country is split. The year 1968 is the breaking point. In January, during the Tet holiday, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched a massive coordinated surprise attack across all of South Vietnam. Militarily, the Tet Offensive is a disaster for the communists. They are slaughtered. But psychologically, it is a catastrophic victory for them. The American government had been telling the public, "We are winning the war." The Tet Offensive proves that this is a lie. The most trusted man in America, TV anchorman Walter Cronkite, goes on air and declares the war mired in stalemate. President Johnson, hearing this, knows he has lost the country. He goes on television and stuns the nation. "I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president." The entire world seems to be on fire. 1968 is the year of global revolution. In Paris, students and workers join forces, almost toppling the government. In Chicago, police and anti-war protesters battle in the streets outside the Democratic National Convention. And in Czechoslovakia, a new leader, Alexander Dubček, tries to create socialism with a human face. He ends censorship and introduces reforms. This is the Prague Spring. The Soviet leader, Leonid Brezhnev, watches with growing alarm. He will not tolerate another Hungary. In August, Warsaw Pact tanks rolled into Prague. The Prague Spring is crushed. Brezhnev issues his doctrine: the Soviet Union has the right to intervene in any brother country that strays from the path. Richard Nixon was elected in 1968 on a promise of peace with honor. His plan is Vietnamization, to slowly pull American troops out while training the South Vietnamese to fight for themselves. But to force the North to the peace table, he expanded the war, authorizing secret, illegal bombing campaigns in neighboring Cambodia and Laos. When the public finds out, college campuses explode. At Kent State University in 1970, the Ohio National Guard opened fire on student protesters, killing 4. The nation is at war with itself. This proxy war is being mirrored across the globe. The CIA and the KGB are in a deadly shadow war. In Latin America, the CIA backed a bloody coup in Chile in 1973, toppling the democratically elected Marxist Salvador Allende and installing the brutal dictator Augusto Pinochet. In Africa, newly independent nations like Angola and the Congo become battlegrounds, their civil wars funded and armed by Moscow and Washington. The Cold War is now a truly global, cynical, and bloody contest for influence. chewing up the developing world in its ideological gears. After the trauma of the 1960s, the world is exhausted. The war in Vietnam is too hot, the protests too loud, the nuclear threat too real. Both superpowers, in their own ways, are stumbling. They need a break. This new era of weary pragmatism gets a French name, détente. Its chief architect is Richard Nixon and his brilliant, controversial advisor, Henry Kissinger. They believe in a realpolitik that sees the world not as a battle between good and evil, but as a five-sided game between the US, the Soviets, China, Europe, and Japan. Their goal is not to win the Cold War, but to manage it. And to do that, Nixon does the unthinkable. In 1972, Nixon, the man who built his career as a rabid anti-communist, went to China. He stands on the Great Wall. He shakes hands with Mao Zedong. The visit is a geopolitical earthquake. It officially recognizes the People's Republic of China, and more importantly, it splits the two great communist powers. Nixon is playing the China card, forcing the Soviet Union to worry about an enemy on both of its borders. The ploy works. Just weeks later, Brezhnev, terrified of a US-China alliance, invites Nixon to Moscow. In the Kremlin, they sign the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT-WE. For the first time, the two superpowers agree to limit the number of nuclear missiles they build. It is the high watermark of détente. In 1975, the long American nightmare in Vietnam finally ended. After Nixon resigns in the Watergate scandal, the US Congress cut off all funding to South Vietnam. The North Vietnamese army launches its final offensive. The images are a final global humiliation. Desperate South Vietnamese collaborators climbing the walls of the US Embassy in Saigon, trying to get on the last helicopters out. The domino has fallen. In America, the 1970s are a decade of doubt. The nation is suffering from stagflation, a toxic mix of high unemployment and runaway inflation. The humiliation of Vietnam and Watergate leads to a crisis of confidence. At the same time, the Soviet Union looks like it's winning. Its military has never been bigger. It has achieved nuclear parity with the US. Its influence is spreading in Africa and Latin America. But on the inside, the system is rotting. This is the era of stagnation. Under Leonid Brezhnev, the system is a corrupt, inefficient, bureaucratic mess. The state-run economy can produce tanks and missiles, but it cannot produce blue jeans or good toilet paper. Store shelves are empty. The black market is the only market that works. Life expectancy is falling. Alcoholism is rampant. The Soviet Union is a superpower built on a foundation of lies and decay. Détente, this fragile peace, is about to be shattered. In December 1979, the Soviet Union made its last and most fatal mistake. It invades Afghanistan. Brezhnev, clinging to his doctrine, sends the Red Army to prop up a failing communist government in Kabul. He expects a quick, surgical operation. He gets his own Vietnam. The Afghan fighters, the Mujahideen, are tough, know the terrain, and are motivated by a new, powerful force, radical Islam. They declare a jihad against the godless Soviets. And the United States, seeing a chance to give the Soviets a taste of their own medicine, responds. The CIA, in its most successful covert operation ever, begins funneling billions of dollars and high-tech weapons, including Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, to the Afghan rebels. A young, wealthy Saudi named Osama bin Laden even comes to Afghanistan to help the cause. The invasion destroys détente. President Jimmy Carter pulls the US out of the 1980 Moscow Olympics. He calls the invasion the greatest threat to peace, since World War II. America, feeling weak, humiliated by the Iran hostage crisis, and angry about Afghanistan, turns to a new leader. In 1980, it elected Ronald Reagan. He is a former actor, a true believer in American exceptionalism, and he has a very simple, radical new idea. He doesn't want to manage the Cold War. He doesn't want to contain communism. He wants to win it. The 1980s begin as the Second Cold War. The rhetoric is hot, and the danger is real. Ronald Reagan, allied with British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, sees the world in stark moral terms. He calls the Soviet Union the focus of evil in the modern world, an evil empire. This isn't just talk. Reagan launches the largest peacetime military buildup in American history. He funded the B-1 stealth bomber and new nuclear missiles in Europe. And then he proposes something out of science fiction, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars. It's a plan for a space-based shield of lasers and missiles to shoot down any incoming Soviet attack. Most scientists think it's a fantasy, but the Soviets are terrified. They don't know if it's possible, and they know, with their broken economy, they cannot possibly afford to keep up. The arms race is back, and it's a race the Soviet Union is losing. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has become a funeral home. The old guard, the gerontocracy, is dying. Brezhnev died in 1982. His replacement, the ex-KGB chief Yuri Andropov, died in 1984. His replacement, the ailing Konstantin Chernenko, died in 1985. The system is paralyzed. And then, in March 1985, a new, young and dynamic leader came to power, Mikhail Gorbachev. He is 54 years old. He is a true believer in communism. But he is not blind. He knows the system is broken, stagnating in a sea of corruption and vodka. He wants to save communism from itself. He has two radical new ideas. The first is perestroika, or restructuring, to introduce limited market reforms and breathe life into the dead economy. The second, and more dangerous idea, is glasnost, or openness. He believes the system can only be fixed if people are free to criticize it. In 1986, just as he's beginning, a disaster exposed the rotten core of the entire Soviet state. A reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine explodes. It is the worst nuclear disaster in history. And the Soviet response is the old way, to lie. They try to cover it up, to say nothing, until a radioactive cloud drifts over Sweden and the world's alarms go off. Gorbachev is furious. He realizes that a system built on secrets and lies cannot survive. Glasnost is no longer a choice. It is a necessity. He also knows he must end the arms race. He meets with Ronald Reagan. At first, they are bitter enemies, but slowly they form one of the most unlikely and consequential friendships in history. At a summit in Reykjavik, Iceland, they shock the world by nearly agreeing to eliminate all nuclear weapons. The deal falls apart over Star Wars, but the ice is broken. In 1987, Reagan stood at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin and issued a challenge. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. But Gorbachev is about to do something even more revolutionary. He makes the single most important decision of the Cold War. He announces that the Soviet Union will no longer use the Red Army to prop up the communist governments of Eastern Europe. The Brezhnev Doctrine is dead. He tells his satellite leaders, "You are on your own." He has no idea what he is about to unleash. 1989 is the year the dam breaks. In Poland, the banned trade union Solidarity wins a free election. In Hungary, the government, sensing the change, literally cuts the barbed wire on its border with Austria. It is the first hole in the Iron Curtain. thousands of East Germans on holiday in Hungary simply walk across the border to freedom. The East German state is hemorrhaging. Protests erupt in cities like Leipzig. And then the focus returns, as it always must, to Berlin. On the night of November 9th, 1989, a confused, mid-level East German official in a live press conference is asked when new, relaxed travel laws will take effect. He shuffles his papers and improvises. As far as I know, immediately, without delay. The news spreads like wildfire. East Berliners, in a daze, swarm the Berlin Wall. They go to the checkpoints and face the guards, who have no orders. The guards are terrified. Do they shoot, or do they open the gate? They open the gate. That night is the greatest street party in history. People climb the wall. They dance, they cry, they take chisels and hammers to the hated symbol of oppression. The Berlin Wall, the central icon of the Cold War, is gone. Gorbachev, true to his word, watches and does nothing. The dominoes fall one by one in a matter of weeks. The Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia. The bloody fall of the dictator in Romania. In 1990, Germany itself was reunified. Gorbachev has set a fire he cannot control. His glasnost has not just opened up criticism, it has unleashed 70 years of pent-up nationalism within the Soviet Union itself. The component republics of the USSR, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Georgia, all want out. In August 1991, communist hardliners, terrified of Gorbachev's new Union Treaty that gives the republics autonomy, launched a coup. They place Gorbachev under house arrest. They declare a state of emergency. It looks like the old dark days are back. But the people have tasted freedom. They pour into the streets of Moscow. A new, charismatic, and often drunk figure, Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic, climbs onto a tank outside the parliament building and defies the coup plotters. The army, told to fire on its own people, refuses. The coup collapses in 3 days. Gorbachev returns, but he is a man without a country. The power has shifted to Yeltsin and the independent republics. One by one, they declare their independence. On Christmas Day, December 25th, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev goes on television and resigns as president of a country that no longer exists. That night, the red hammer and sickle flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time, replaced by the tricolor of the new Russian Federation. The Soviet Union is over. The Cold War is over. The United States is the world's sole, undisputed superpower. It is, as one writer called it, the end of history. But as the world celebrates, new, unforeseen challenges are already gathering in the shadows of this new, uncertain world.